welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Danny Cannell. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and everywhere you get your podcasts on demand. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that subscribe, smash that like, and come and join us in the chat, a.k.a. the Cover 3 Tailgate, where we are getting interactive here on a Thursday. I mean, this Thursday, it's going to be locks time before you know it. For right now, get those mailbag questions in. I went through the big old bag of mail. I pulled out a new, fresh batch. So for the next couple weeks, we're going to be getting through that. But as always on a Thursday, we like to be able to entertain those of you who got the conversation going from the start. So first, from Preston, morning. I want Tom's reaction to the Illinois throwback uniforms. For those who maybe have not gotten a chance to see the Illinois throwback uniforms, I wasn't sure if it was fake or not, but they are very, very real. It is to commemorate the 100th anniversary of 100 years and one day after Red Grange's historic 6-touchdown performance against Michigan in the Memorial Stadium dedication game in 1924. The helmet is made to look like they are still wearing leather helmets. The colors are the same colors that every football team had in 1924. Tom, your thoughts?
8.4 out of 10. I
Okay.
love the helmet. I think the hand painted leather helmet is a pretty cool look. The rest of the jerseys I'm like fine with. I don't have much thoughts in them. I think the helmet is a fun idea.
This might be the biggest homer pick I've ever heard in the history of the show. I mean, sack up and be real men and just wear leather helmets, damn it, just for one game. Come on. This is your opportunity. I do, on a serious note, unfortunately, I think when they do like lists every year, off-season rankings, and they rank the ugliest uniforms of all time, and they come out with the Steelers, who are like the bib numbers and the twirl socks, this might make some of those lists, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, I am not in love with like the design on like the jersey, like the pillars or stripes or whatever that they have on them. Like, I'm not a big fan of that. I like the helmet a lot. That's really all.
Every single uniform from like the pre-World War II era all looks the same. But they hey, listen, you're shouting out beating Michigan as you're going to play Michigan on October the 19th. So yeah, I know a lot of people will be talking about Georgia and Texas on that day. No, my eyes will be dialed into Illinois and Michigan and those throwback uniforms.
The good news is, like, if Michigan wins, I could just blame it on the uniforms. Like, we would have won if we wear our regular uniforms, but, we were embarrassed.
One more from the tailgate. Gregory jumped in at 9:09 a.m. Eastern time. Lots were open, cracked a cold one, and said, who would you guys say are the most important position coaches on staff? Then he offers his own to be its quarterback coach, then defensive and offensive line coaches. Agree. How would you rank the rest? Danny, how would you... Where the position coaches have the most value in your opinion?
I think it's interesting you said position coaches, because I would have said don't forget about the strength and conditioning coach, which is not really a position coach, but it is at such a critical time of your life when your body's developing. We always talk about, how the body changes when you're 18 till you're 23. Well, a lot of that takes place from your 18 to 19 and your kind of first experience in a real program like that. I mean, I'm biased towards quarterback, but I would say I kind of agree. The defensive and offensive line coaches are probably underrated, but a lot of times they are the loudest, like screamiest coaches that you hear, because they got to get them going, like they're a group. They kind of see them going out there like cattle, just kind of grazing the field on their way over to the drills. You got to get them up, got them ready. And they are probably the two most important positions as far as impacting the quarterback. So I would tend to agree.
Offensive line coach by a mile.
Whoa.
I don't care. I don't care what kind of offense you're running. If your offensive line sucks, your offense is going to suck. You have to, like, an offensive line is the one position too. Like, if you're a quarterback coach, you can just go in the portal and get yourself a ready-made QB, and you really don't have to do a whole lot of work. But these days, you still have to recruit and develop your offensive line. So having a good offensive line coach, you can take that 3-star and mold him into an above average power 4 level starter is huge. And I think that is probably far and away the more important, because defensive line and quarterback, those are portal positions. You do not find offensive linemen in the portal the same way.
Great call, and especially in terms of the transfer portal. Danny, the reputation of wide receivers and defensive backs is always that they are divas. Does that extend to the coaches? Are the wide receiver coach and the cornerbacks coach, do they operate with a little bit of a different flair, similar to the players at those positions?
Probably, although Mickey Andrews, who did a lot of work with a secondary at Florida State, was one of the nastiest SOBs you would ever come across. So he kind of bucked that trend. But yeah, I think they do have to treat the wide receivers and DBs a little differently than you treat the offensive and defensive linemen.
Wasn't Dabo a wide receiver coach?
Yes.
Oh, talk about saucy.
Well, I mean, Saban was a defensive backs coach. Kirby is a defensive backs coach. Like nobody is coming within 3 miles of the word diva when it comes to those two. So it also reflected in the way their defensive backs played. So I think I was watching we might get to it, but I was watching old, like 2010 Alabama, like when they had Dre Kirkpatrick, when CJ Mosley was a freshman, when like Jim McElwain wouldn't even let him throw the ball because you had Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson. Like I feel like those defensive backs are the farthest thing from diva that you're going to find.
See, I don't think it's fair to compare defensive backs and wide receivers. I think they're different. Like, I think wide receivers are very much have a tendency to be divas. I think defensive backs are football players, man. They're just more athletic than some of the other guys.
Well, and also at the professional level, the position has been glamorized with the increase in pay, which has led to, larger than life personalities at those spots.
Yeah, like you get the occasional like Dion, but for every Dion, there's like 15 dudes who are just trying to hit people.
That's true. What about,
or they're receivers who can't catch.
Or the receivers.
Well, like Revis had a larger than life personality, right?
Yeah, Jalen Ramsey does. But I don't see. But Jalen Ramsey is also a football player to me. He just happens to have a high opinion of himself, and he should, because he's pretty good.
You have to have ultimate confidence to be both of these positions, but probably if DB, you have to almost have a false confidence, because you're going to get beat no matter how great you are.
Of the time.
I went to Dolphins practice last week, Thursday last week, missed the show, but I was watching Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey do one-on-one drills, and I'm sitting there thinking, without a rush, like, this is impossible. Yet Jalen Ramsey was trying to cover, like doing his best, and he had a couple good reps, but it's almost impossible to ask you to stay and cover somebody from start to finish.
That's pretty awesome. Like two of the
it was an unbelievable battle.
Yeah. Two of the best going at it there in practice. All right. Oh, no good pivot out of this one, because this is just very, very disappointing across the board. We discussed yesterday during a little medical report roundup that CJ Baxter had suffered an injury. He would undergo testing, and we would see what it meant for Texas moving forward. Well, the reporting comes out, and then Texas confirms later in the day that star running back CJ Baxter will miss the rest of the season. He's got about a 6 to 9 month recovery. He will require knee surgery for that injury. Somebody who we projected to be the starter, as he was the starter after Jonathan Brooks went down with a knee injury last year. At the beginning of the season, they had Jonathan Brooks, they had CJ Baxter, they had Jadon Blue. Now Blue, a junior who has a lot of support within that locker room, he has now moved to the alpha of that running back room. Tom, you'd been talking about CJ Baxter on your watch list. What was the name of the watch list again?
My dudes who blanking rule list.
The dudes who blanking rule list. What do we do if we're the Texas offense, if we're Steve Sarkisian, when you lose a player like that?
It's running back is one of those positions where obviously in college we still see more of like a primary back instead of the committee approach that you see in the NFL everywhere. But I do think Texas has enough talent in that position to where they'll be able to get by. Like, Jadon Blue is a good player. They have guys behind him in Wisner, Gibson, Clark, and other freshmen who are expected to be good players. It's just ideally You don't want those third, fourth, and fifth guys to be somebody you're relying on a lot this season. You were hoping that it would be Baxter and Blue and sprinkling in those other guys. So you lose Baxter. That means you've got a lot more inexperienced players who are going to be stepping into big roles and big spots. And I just think also, like, CJ Baxter is really good. He is a difference maker at that position. He is the kind of guy who you can give him the ball and he can break it free for 70 yards for a touchdown from anywhere on the field. He's a good runner. He's a good catcher out of the backfield. He's not easy to replace, but now you have to try. And I look at the Longhorns, and like I said yesterday before we found out he was out for the year, this isn't the kind of injury that destroys their season, but it is the kind of injury that could ultimately prove to be a deciding factor in whether they win the SEC and get a first-round bye in the playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's certain teams, like if Oklahoma State lost Ollie Gordon, we'd all be like, oh, man, like this impacts the win total, like the whole complexion of the season. And there aren't that many teams where you see a running back of that impact. I think Tom hit on some great points. I think it's like, how good could this be team or could Texas be top end? They're still going to be good. I don't think it's a huge deal, but I think where you also become concerned is depth. Like then you're one step closer to another rung down the depth chart. So that becomes an issue. Can you keep them all fresh? It just becomes a little bit more of an obstacle to overcome. I think I checked the Michigan spread. I don't think it changed, early. So like, it's not that type of mover, but it just makes you a little bit more on thin ice if you're Texas.
Yeah. Texas has, against maybe 8 of its opponents, more talent than the opposition. Like they could just go out there and out talent. But when they're playing Georgia's defense, when they're playing Michigan's defense, when they're playing maybe even Texas A&M's defense, like there are going to be times where they're going to need, oh man, you ready for this one? They're going to need players to make plays. Sometimes you just need players to make plays. And I think CJ Baxter's, one of those difference makers out there. So a big loss. And also take a step back between Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter. You've lost a lot of a really good run game from Texas's offense 1 year ago. You've lost almost all of the receiving yards and receptions. And look, when you go get Isaiah Bond, somebody who we know is a very good player, when you go get Amari Niblack, also from Alabama, when you go get Matthew Golden from Houston, and we get to see him flash in the spring game in a way that gives us confidence, we feel like this Texas offense, because it's got 4 or 5 starters back on the offensive line, Kelvin Banks among one of the best in the country, because you've got not only Quinn Ewers, but Arch Manning. I think that we do a lot of assuming in terms of they're just going to be able to keep it up. But this is, just another thing to take note of, especially as you mentioned, if anything happens to Blue, now all of a sudden we're going with some inexperience, and your job isn't just to run the ball. You also got to get in there and block. And that could be tough for a newer member of the offense. Oh, Silas Bolden as well from Oregon State. Yeah, big portal haul. Tom, you indicated that you've got a major announcement, so I will go ahead and I'll go ahead and let you step forward with that.
Yeah, we try to keep things light and fun on this show, but sometimes things get a little serious, and this is one of those times. We've talked about it behind the scenes for a few weeks now. We came to the decision today, and when I say we, I mean everybody here at the Cover 3 podcast, me, Chip, Danny, Bud, and Mikey, our producer. And we've decided today is the time that we are going to announce a 4-year show cause retroactive to the 2021 season for former Cover 3 co-host Barton Simmons that bans him from co-hosting a podcast for 4 years in light of some violations we uncovered. So yeah, we hate to do it, but Barton, sorry, you are banned from hosting a podcast for 4 years starting in 2021.
Retroactively. Yeah. Retroactively. That's the thing, is it is a 4-year show cause, retroactive, lack of cooperation. I mean, it's just, it really doesn't feel like you are assisting in the investigation process. So, I think our punishments are stronger than the NCAA.
I think ours are more worthy as well.
What did you make of Danny? What did you make of this 4-year show cause for Jim Harbaugh of Tom Mars's Comic Sans MS Paint statement. I mean,
it's so it got me yesterday. I thought it was the signal stealing thing, and I was like, well,
a lot of people still
on
do.
Them. Yeah, it got me for a couple hours, and then I was like, oh, wait, because I think I even was like, I asked somebody that told me, I was like, what happened to Sharon Moore? Did he get anything? And it was like, no. And I was like, oh, wow. This is really dumb. I agree with Tom Mars. I mean, his assessment of it. I think a lot of this is sort of personal vendetta against Harbaugh because of his refusal to cooperate. Although there was a precedent that was set with Arizona State. Herm Edwards got a 5-year show cause for meeting with 30 different players during the COVID era. Nebraska caught some of that too, as well with Scott Frost. I will say, I thought a lot of the policies that were in place were stupid during COVID. But it was one where the people, it's not like recruiting scandals and recruiting cheating when it's like everybody's doing it. I do think some coaches might, and even university presidents from that angle, might have been pounding the table way back then saying, look, if we're going to abide by these rules, they need to too. So like, I get it. It's all stupid now, but I do think the NCAA probably was getting pressure from people at the time, but why couldn't you have done this a while ago? Like why did this take so long to come out? Because now it looks even stupider. Like it looks so dumb.
Because the NCAA is chicken shit. This is like a chicken shit kind of ruling. Like, I'm not arguing that you said there's precedent for this. Other guys have gotten show causes for these same violations. I'm not saying Jim Harbaugh is gotten an unfair punishment for whatever rules that they broke. But they also announced punishments for this last year while Jim Harbaugh was coaching. And for some reason, while he was coaching, it was a 4-game suspension. But now that he's no longer coaching at the college level, he's got an NFL job and he's 60 years old and he's won a national title at his alma mater. So there's no reason to think he's going to be coming back to coach college ever. They give him the 4-year show cause to make you think they're doing their job. That's all it does. I give the NCAA so much crap, and I will give them credit. They do a lot of good stuff as far as organizing the athletics among colleges, these tournaments and everything, and keeping everything going. But when it comes to the enforcement arm, they are chicken shit. It is pointless. There is no rhyme or reason. They only do it to just like for PR purposes. Look, we punished them. Okay, great.
I hope, and this is not anything against Jim Harbaugh, but I've talked a lot about punishing the present, punishing the future, punishing the past.
Mm-hmm.
If they just want to hang everything on Harbaugh, then I would be fine with that. Like if Jim Harbaugh is going to be what they want to point to, if the enforcement has a vendetta against him, if they want to be able to have really big press releases, the "We got him" banner comes down in Indianapolis, like that's fine. I would rather that happen than Sharon Moore and the current Michigan Wolverines and the future Michigan Wolverines end up having to take like a heavy punishment from, the NCAA, just feeling like they need to do something. If you feel like you need to do something, if this ends up falling on Harbaugh, then that's an end result that, as an uninvested bystander, I think that I would be fine with that. It would feel more fair than if all of a sudden Michigan players in the future end up having to take the punishment of a vendetta against Jim Harbaugh and his lack of cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. This one was, let's see. Here we go. And now we pivot quickly into the less serious. Is there a threshold of losses in the 2024 season that would make you think, yeah, Michigan was cheating last year? This is a question for those listening at home. This is a question from the Tailgate. Username Hot Danger got it in before the show started. And I figured we might end up talking Harbaugh at some point. So let's pivot back into the fun on this. What is the record that would make you reconsider Michigan? And
none. There's nothing.
Methods.
It's a completely different team with a completely different coaching staff.
Yeah, there we go. I need an answer. If they miss the postseason and Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Will Johnson and Donovan Edwards all play every game and they are 4-8, maybe.
Right.
You know what I'll think if Michigan goes 2-10? I'll think Michigan's too scared to steal signs this year while everybody else still is. That's what I'll think. Like, come on. I mean, no, yeah, everybody who thinks Michigan's cheated already will still think, and everybody who doesn't think Michigan cheated will not think so. That's my prediction, no matter what happens. Because again, like we talked about a minute ago, like when these suspensions came, I still have people in my mentions like, you still think the sign stealing wasn't a big deal now? The NCAA certainly does. It's like, that's not what the suspension's for, people. But yeah, that's what you'll see, no matter what.
4-8. They're 4-8, maybe. But I mean, like what? They beat Penn State and Ohio State and Alabama and a 14-0 Washington team all after the scandal broke loose.
Yep.
I think they were good. I think they had more better players than most teams in the country. That's how you go 15-0. So, but 4-8, yeah, I would start to reconsider. Coming up on the other side, the coaches poll came out at the beginning of the week, and Georgia received a majority of the first place votes. Georgia was also number 1 in the CBS Sports 134, and looks like they're lining up to be the consensus number 1 team. But one fan wants to say, are we so sure about that? We'll get into all that and more next.
Have you heard of semaglutides? Ozempic, Mounjaro?
Hartman, this could be dangerous. Let's do it.
South Park, The End of Obesity. New exclusive event, now streaming. Exclusively on Paramount+.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. And if you go and leave us a 5-star review, and in that review, put a mailbag question, we'll throw it in the big old bag of mail and tackle it in a future mailbag episode or segment. This one comes from Mr. JBQ. It says, long-time listener. I only listen to 2 college football podcasts. One for my team, parentheses, OH, and one with the national perspective. I assume that's us. Yours is the best for a comprehensive view. On the other podcast, my fellow Bucknuts have a hard time understanding why Ohio State is not a consensus number 1 team in the country. I know there are other teams that also have good rosters, but please give me some specific areas that Georgia is at least as good as Ohio State and or better, so I can interact with some of the more enthusiastic, if not somewhat myopic, fans.
Quarterback and offensive line, pretty big deals.
And it's not that, like, there's not a huge separator, but we've seen the quarterback at Georgia execute at Georgia at an extremely high level, right?
Yes.
Like that to me is a difference maker. Offensive line, we've seen historically an offensive line play better, handle physicality more. I would say on the defense as well. Did we read the David Hale stat that he had out there about Kirby Smart and Georgia? Like, if you went on history.
Oh yeah, without like the Nick Saban losses.
Yeah, it's insane. So Georgia has not lost to a coach other than Saban since November of 2020, which was Dan Mullen, an active FBS coach since 2019, which was Tom Herman at Texas, and an active FBS coach in an SEC game since Gus Malzahn in 2017. So let's just go back and look at history and say, all right, well, if they're that close, and they are close, it's not like Ohio State's been disrespected. Let's go with historical results when Ohio State hasn't been able to win their own conference in 3 years.
Yeah,
and I like Ohio State this year.
Right. But I mean, if an Ohio State fan's going to jump into the mailbag and be like, well, what's so good about Georgia? I don't know. 46 of the last 48 games have ended up being Georgia wins. The fact that you've got players like, you mentioned offensive line, Tate Ratledge comes back. I mean, I was filling out my All-American ballot, and I had like 3 or 4 Georgia players in consideration for only about 5 or 6 spots. I didn't put them all on there, but I put 2 of them on there. I really think that offensive line, quarterback, where else do you think Georgia is definitely better? I'm going to say no on running back and no on wide receiver.
I would give them tight end.
I'd give Georgia tight end.
I would give them possibly linebackers.
I would give them linebackers. Smell Munden's awesome.
Yeah. And I think secondary, you could argue Ohio State has the two best players in Burke
And Downs.
But Malachi Starks is not that far off of Caleb Downs.
Yeah.
And I think overall, you can argue Georgia's secondary is on par with Ohio State's.
Like deeper, like if we were to take like what is the average player, I think that if you throw like Allen,
it's close
there.
It's kind of like, your preference for what you're looking for and also what you're playing. But I think Georgia's secondary is very good for how they play. And I think Ohio State's is very good for how they play. So I think secondary is a wash. Linebackers, Georgia, defensive line. For now, I give Ohio State the edge, but I think Georgia's could be better by the end of the year. I think offensive line, I go with Georgia. I go tight ends, I go with Georgia. Receivers, I go Ohio State. Running backs, I go Ohio State. Quarterback, I go with Georgia.
Yeah. The offensive line and quarterback also a spot for Ohio State last year that Mr. JBQ, I mean, I imagine you were critical of those positions as well. That's why you go into the portal. That's why you try to, put more pieces around there to try to improve that play. To your point, Danny, we saw it. We saw it for Georgia. They had no losses going into the SEC championship game. So I'm comfortable with Georgia as my number one. All right, let's go back to the tailgate. This one comes from Lane. What's your favorite play all time?
Four verts.
Danny, what was your? I thought this would be a good one for Danny.
I mean, are we talking about like play like that happened?
I was wondering too. I went back to what was my favorite play that I ran.
That's what I wanted. Yeah.
So my favorite play that I ever had was my one and only rushing touchdown in the Choke-a-Doke, down 31-3. It was the third touchdown we scored 4 in the fourth quarter. It was the third that cut it to 1 score. And my guy, Kevin Carter, who's a colleague at CBS Sports, I just outran him. Like the speed took over. You can't coach speed. And I, got that edge and just turned on the jets and had that 2-yard rushing touchdown. Might have been 1.5, but we'll give me the 2. And the fact that it was my only rushing touchdown, it's one of the most memorable games. That was probably my favorite play.
Let's stay there. Do you remember the play call, or could you describe it?
It was just shotgun right, 17 naked. Like that was the name.
Boot out, and then if you've got it, or was it always going to be a run?
No, I had never run. We usually had like a little bounce route on the inside. I'd hit Kes McCorvey on, and there was like a fade over the top, and then a drag coming across the back of the end zone or the field, wherever we were. And they had crashed because they were like dropping into coverage. They're like, he's not going to run. And so it opened up perfectly.
I would say my favorite offensive play, everybody has different names for it, although most teams run some version of it. It's just a pretty simple flood concept. I feel like it gives you enough options to where no matter what you're looking for, like the big play could be there, or just like the first down can be there. One receiver runs a clear out, fade. And then you have another one running a deep out, and then you have your running back running a short out, and then you have another guy from the opposite side of the field coming across on a shallow kind of dig. Like Virginia Tech ran the hell out of it last year. It was Kyron Jones was killing people with it. But it's a very simple concept that is very difficult to defend because there are multiple receivers at multiple levels, and typically one of them is going to be open on every single play.
And your quarterback only has to read one side of the field, basically.
Yeah, and if he's mobile too, if like they are actually covered, he could just take off and probably get, depending on how the defense is defending it, he could probably get just 5 or 6 yards and get to the sideline. It's really hard to stop.
The old Ohio State mesh concepts when you were running out like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and just freaks at wide receiver. Mm-hmm. Somebody ends up getting picked over the middle of the field, and you only have to. Yeah, you only have to
talk about stealing signs while we're out here letting people just run pick routes all the time, and we want to talk about cheating.
So was it a pick route? Was when Hunter Renfrow?
There are 85 pick routes per game, Chip. Just blatant offensive pass interference that we just let go because points.
All right, Danny, what about a play to call? I did like that story. Hopefully we're going to be able to dig up that video and line it up and maybe go down memory lane with it.
Yeah.
But what about a play to call?
Tom hit a really good one. 4 verts was a 560 vertical was what we called it at Florida State. And the best part about that was if you didn't if you had man coverage, a single high safety, you could potentially take the 2 shots up the middle, like the seam routes.
Yeah.
And then, if you had if they all pressed on the outside, you could take a shot at one of the deeper outs. Cover 2, you'd have that bend route. One of the middle goes would run a bend route. So we'd break it into the middle and you could hit like a post over the middle. But one of my favorite things was if you did get man coverage and maybe you didn't like some of the matchups on the outside or the receiver wasn't getting behind them, Warwick Dunn, who was next to me coming out of the backfield, would run an option route. So everybody's clearing out and it was a really easy throw. And Warwick could break right, left, or if it was zone, he would hook up. But if it was man coverage, he would usually break the guy's ankles that the linebacker trying to cover him. And then it was a pretty easy throw and he would turn it up. And it was always a very, that play had so many different options to it. It felt like you could beat, any coverage you saw.
Yeah, 7-yard throw for Danny Cannell that goes in as 43 in the stat sheet. Thanks, Warwick. Appreciate that talk. All right, so this is a question that ties back to some of our conversations this past week. Of course, we've been going through our ACC win totals. We did the first half of the alphabet on Monday, the second half on Wednesday, Miami through Wake Forest, and then Boston College through Louisville was the way we split it up. And earlier this summer, a user named Paul Power jumped into the big old bag of mail. He said, absolutely love the show. It's the perfect mix of journalistic chops, playing experience, and data analysis. And it's all bundled up in a backyard beers conversation that makes you feel like part of the tailgate. They are able to maintain a big picture, real world perspective while still having the joy of watching midweek action and hoping the wonder cashes. Can't recommend enough. Mailbag question. Y'all have been justifiably critical of Dabo Sweeney's approach to the transfer portal. What kind of record would Clemson need before you would change your opinion? Then he adds, is Dabo the CEO type coach needed for this new era of college football, or did he simply hit some home run coaching hires and maximize generational quarterback talent? Let's do part 1 first, and then we can work our way to part 2.
Fair or not, here's the reality of the situation. Before the portal era, Dabo was winning national titles at Clemson. Since the beginning of the portal era, when Dabo has not been using the portal, Clemson has failed to reach the playoff multiple times, and they failed to win national titles. I think that unless Clemson starts getting back into the actual national title conversation, people will still be critical of the way he approaches the transfer portal. So I think that is how you'd answer the first one. Again, fair or not, that's just the reality.
I think it's easy. The record that he needs to silence the critics is 1-0.
Oh, beat Georgia.
I mean, if he beats Georgia, he can dunk on everybody because then he would have beat one of the kings of, one of the teams that, replace them in this national conversation. I think that's all it would take. I think we all like Dabo. It's just he's really being stubborn on this topic. And he's not taking advantage of the system that's in place. It's the exact same way as if an NFL team was trying to refuse to use free agency, like not even signing one player and going, we're going to work, we're going to scout through the draft, and we're going to keep them homegrown. We're going to reward the guys that stay, which I appreciate. And I would love to see if they were able to prove everybody wrong. I just think he's making life harder on himself.
What's funny is you mentioned it's like an NFL team refusing to use free agency. For a while, there was an NFL team that really did not use free agency that had success. They were called the Green Bay Packers. And the reason they kept having success was because they went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. Now they're more active in free agency. But when Clemson wasn't using the free agent portal and having success, what did they have? They had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And now DJU and Cade Klubnik haven't quite lived up to that standard. And it's like, wow, you should probably sign some free agents.
I think that Dabo Sweeney is one of the best in the country when it comes to evaluating talent and character. And I'm not going to do like the big, like high character guys, but there's something to be said for the fact that players come to Clemson and stay at Clemson. you have players that I think RJ Mickens was one of the notable ones that's left recently. Over the last couple of years in the portal era, they have lost players, but really, really good players come to Clemson and stay at Clemson, often in a situation where they aren't given the full, like, you're the starter right away kind of treatment. And they do have to work themselves up in the program. We've talked about it on here in the OKGs, the R kind of guys. And Clemson does a great job of not even being one of the hats on the table because they've already got it locked up. You've got other premier programs from the SEC and elsewhere where on National Signing Day, it seems like their hat is on every table and maybe not getting picked. Clemson's hat isn't even on the table because they get commitments, and those commitments stick and do not flip when they get to Clemson. They stay in the program, and those high school recruiting classes are awesome. They like among the top 2 or 3 in the conference, among the top 10 to 15 nationally. So he is still one of the best in the country at evaluating the types of players that come into the program. I wish he would take that same approach to the transfer portal, because if you're so good at that, especially at getting them at a young age and figuring it out, I would think that you would have a shot at being able to reach out to even, some of those guys that maybe you were in touch with early in the recruiting process that went somewhere else, that maybe if you see their name pop up in that little portal, you can restart the conversation, because that's what we hear from so many coaches, is that a lot of their portal activity is just reopening the notebook from high school recruiting and restarting the relationships that they already had.
And the irony, it's not even irony, it's just the hilarious part of this is, and like the way how things change for everybody, is 10 years ago, Dabo's running the program this way. And we talk about how he's doing it, capital TRW, the right way. He's not running players off. He's not gray shirting kids. He's not telling them you suck and clearing space for somebody to replace them. Like we saw a lot of programs who are successful doing, but now in the portal era with NIL, the right way is now the wrong way.
Serious note on answering the question. Like, isn't it I don't want to say worst case, like the most likely scenario is that Clemson's going to be probably good again, but are they good enough to, like, they could they could be 10-2, win the ACC, get to the playoff, and Dabo feels vindicated. Like, see, we're right there, but they come up short of a national championship. Like and I think Bud has even alluded to this, like the only thing that will get Dabo to change his mind is if the assistants start pressuring him, or if they do go 8-4 again, or something bad, like to rip off the Band-Aid and say, we have to do something different, because Dabo was loyal to his coordinators early in his career. And then all of a sudden the fan base started pressuring Dabo. And this is pre-national championships. What'd he do? He went out and got Brent Venables and got Chad Morris, and like was kind of forced to do that because things weren't working. Like, I almost wonder, if you're a Clemson fan, do you have that, rip the Band-Aid type season where it is kind of ugly, and then you have to change? And then, I always think of what they could be, because that's probably got to be frustrating for a Clemson fan. They have a hungry fan base that will donate to NIL, and they can spend. Imagine what they could do if they were able to, and Dabo would embrace it.
Tyler from Spartanburg needs to turn up the pressure.
Hey, 5-0 since Tyler called in. All right. And maybe they'll be 1-0 and 6-0 since Tyler called in. Beating the Bulldogs would go a long way. All right, let's hang in this ACC corner for one more question before we hit a break. This question comes from username Bear Territory. Hey, all, love the show. Listen to every episode walking around campus. As a Cal fan, it seems like they've been recruiting much better out of the portal than high school. Does that say something about Justin Wilcox, the school, NIL, or something else? Also, what is Cal's medium-term ceiling in the ACC, and how hopeful should I be? Signed, Jake.
I haven't seen the transcripts of the kids they've gotten out of the portal, but the fact that they've been able to be more active in the portal is a good sign to me, in that the administration is maybe being a little more lenient in what they're allowed to bring in to put on scholarship for the football team, because that is
supportive of the football program's endeavors.
Yeah. Like, that is, it's not, that is a problem for a lot of schools that or football programs at schools that consider themselves to be, academic, whatever, like who
and
really
basketball programs, Juwan Howard.
Yeah. Like it's they don't let everybody in, whereas some schools are just trying to win football games. Like, you have a very supportive board of trustees who are really just as interested in winning football games as you are. So I think it's a good sign. As for where Cal fits in the ACC, like, that's so hard to know, really. Like, I think right now they're a mid-tier ACC team, but they could completely bottom out. They could surprise and be near to the top. It's going to be really hard to know until like probably the second or third year in the league.
I mean, I think that school, the way we described it, sounds like Duke, sounds like Wake Forest, sounds like, academically strong schools, both of who have at least played for the ACC championship game. Now, they haven't won it, and I know we're not having divisions anymore, but I do think they could be an 8-win team in the ACC if they kind of hit it right. I mean, and we assume and it does feel like Clemson, Florida State, Miami all are kind of back this year competitive, which is good for the conference. Mm-hmm. But if one of them stumble, I think it opens up the door where there's a lot of teams that I think Cal could compete with. I think that could kind of be your upside, if you're a Cal fan, hoping like, what could we be?
Yeah, if I'm Justin Wilcox, one of the things that I like about the transfer portal is the ability to get old, to stay old, to have players that know how to handle their business. And it doesn't feel like you're having to train everyone, because Cal, as a recruiting out of high school program, is not a juggernaut. Mm-hmm. Hasn't been. I mean, it is a developmental program. And with the way that the, gotta win now urgency is in college football, sometimes if you got to win now, that means you got to find rentals. You got to find fast answers, and that comes from the transfer portal. So I see that as not a method for survival for Justin Wilcox, but it's like, how do you take a program that does not recruit at a level to win 8, 9, 10 games in the ACC, that you go to the portal and then you go find players that are going to be able to come in and give you those sort of instant results. So, yeah.
And back to the point I was trying to make earlier too, because I can't speak for every transfer, but for a guy like Tobias Merriweather, he was at Notre Dame. So, like, I don't think he's going to have problems transcript-wise getting into Cal. Yeah. But for other guys, it's like, I don't know. It's going to be, there's not enough evidence to suggest that they're totally open to it yet.
Ryan in the tailgate also mentioning that, let's say that you are a prospect from California, one of the states that produces more college football players than anybody else. And let's say you got plucked by a school that's somewhat far away. It's not working out and you want to go home. Cal can make itself an option that is like USC can be, a difficult spot. Cal's right there with UCLA. And they're like, okay, well, listen, if you want to come back, especially if you're in the Bay Area, Cal makes total sense. So you get to offer that as an opportunity to any California natives that might want to come back to their home state. That can be an advantage in the portal as well. All right.
Yeah, but Fresno can take advantage of that far easier.
Why? Because you can get into Fresno?
Because you can get anybody into Fresno if you want to.
Do you think I could get into Fresno?
Yeah, for sure. I believe in you. You're good enough for Fresno State.
That's tagline of the Cover 3 podcast. Put it on a shirt. You're good enough for Fresno State. Let's go Bulldogs. Coming up on the other side, taking a look. If you could only pick one college football Saturday to be dialed into sun up to sundown, what would it be? We'll offer some suggestions and more from the tailgate next.
Never before seen matches and new rivalries unlocked. Trust me, we're just getting started. The Summer Cup is here. Let these games begin.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. And while you know that us here on the Cover 3 podcast are going to be taking it sun up to sundown, I'm not going to spoil any big announcements, but the options that we will give you for pregame coverage in the morning, bigger than ever. Oh, buddy, bigger than ever. We will have options for you, during the day. We're dialed in. And at 11:30 p.m. Eastern time on a Saturday night, that the Cover 3 podcast is going to be there to take you home and recap the day. But at 9:36 a.m. Eastern time, Nicholas jumped on in the tailgate and said, if you could pick only one weekend to watch college football from sun up to sundown, no interruptions, what would you pick for the 2024 season?
So I'm just a regular ass dude who only has one weekend a year to watch college football then?
Correct. You are not the privileged Tom Fornelli who gets it started with Serie A at 6 a.m., takes it into, our CBS Sports pregame coverage, takes it into, wall-to-wall consumption of college football.
I'm just Joe Blow with a weekend off. Week 14. Rivalry weekend.
Ooh.
I mean, even if the games don't all have quote unquote playoff stakes, typically every game. Now, it is somewhat watered down because that's like Thanksgiving week. So you have the Thursday and Friday games that kind of water down the entire menu for Saturday. But every single game on that schedule is going to mean something to the teams playing because they're all either rivalry games and some of them will have conference and playoff stakes as well.
Your Black Friday games include Oklahoma State at Colorado, the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, Clean Old Fashioned Hate, Georgia Tech, Iowa, Nebraska. Hello. We'll have Stanford, San Jose State on CBS. We'll also have Minnesota, Wisconsin for an axe on, Thanksgiving and an axe. What more could you want on CBS, America's Most Watched Network? Then, of course, Iron Bowl, Florida State, Oklahoma at LSU moves into that spot. Clemson, South Carolina, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas A&M. Oregon, Washington in that spot as well.
Ohio State, Michigan.
Oh yeah, Ohio State, Michigan. Notre Dame at USC. Okay, I'll hear it. Danny, do you have one that has your attention?
I think Tom has the best one. I would probably choose the same, but since he did, and also I was picturing a scenario where married dude, his wife goes to a family reunion, so she leaves for Thanksgiving, takes the kids, and he just gets to sit there all weekend. So you get all that football. But if we're just going Saturday, probably still would pick rivalry weekend. But October 12th is the weekend that everybody's kind of circled as the mecca of college football this year, where in the SEC alone, you've got Ole Miss at LSU, Florida at Tennessee. You've got Red River, Oklahoma, Texas. And oh, by the way, if you go out of conference, you also throw in Ohio State at Oregon, Penn State at USC. I'm sure I'm missing a couple because this weekend has been circled by a lot of people as maybe the best college football weekend we've had in a long time as far as matchups go.
Did you just say Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State, USC were out of conference?
Oh, no, did I? I meant
they're conference games now, buddy.
He was saying in the SEC alone, now to pivot out of the SEC to look elsewhere.
Although if you are the type of person who's only tuning into one Saturday a season, you probably will think Oregon and Ohio State is a non-conference.
Exactly. Oh, I didn't know that's a 3-day weekend though. Thanks, Richard, for pointing that out. Columbus Day, the Monday after, October 12th. Well, that'll be needed. That'll be
to recover from that. And why? Why? Because your Mountain West favorites, the Boise State Broncos, are going to be sitting there on CBS Sports Network with an 11 p.m. Eastern time kick. If we're talking true sun up to sundown, you're going to get started. I mean, look, Kansas State at Colorado, that is entertainment at a minimum. That might be getting you started early, and you might be closing it out with Boise State at Hawaii with an 11 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. We also, on the mothership, got San Diego State at Wyoming, UAB at Army. We don't know what our CBS picks are going to be for that, but you mentioned with the Big Ten lineup where you've got Penn State at USC, and you've got that massive, massive game between Ohio State and Oregon. Yeah, I had October 12th circled as well. If you want to take it into the early parts of the weekend, Coastal at JMU on Thursday night. Interesting Sunbelt matchup. And then on Friday, Memphis at USF should be a good one in terms of the American Athletic Conference as well.
You know what that week 7, October 12th date also has in common? or has. It's the first week of Tuesday and Wednesday night football. So it's that stretch starting in October where if you're us and you're not just Joe Blow who gets the one weekend to watch, it's just, sorry, honey, I've got work to do. This FIU Liberty game is huge.
FIU Liberty on CBS Sports Network on Tuesday. New Mexico State at Jacksonville State, CBS Sports Network on
implications,
Wednesday.
honey. I got to go down and watch these things.
It is when my young children end up. Like, what do we do to dry off and get ready after bath? We get out of the bath and we go into daddy's office and we watch some Cayusa. Yeah, that's a pretty dominant weekend right there, through and through. Yeah, we'll see. We got some things in the works, so we'll see what ends up happening with that October 12th weekend. All right, let's go back to we got time for one more from the big old bag of mail, and this one comes from Cole. All right. Longtime listener since the Barton days, and I love the pod. Reminder, Tom started the show with issuing a retroactive 4-year show cause for Barton Simmons. My question, everyone knows that Tom is the unofficial mascot of games played between the service academies, and he should be invited to give a short speech about the record on unders before performing the coin toss. What are the equivalents for Chip, Danny, and Bud, where they should essentially be invited as a grand marshal for a short presentation before said game each season? I've also got a PS here, but I want to get this part first. Actually, I'll do the PS now. PS, is there any way that Danny can buy out of his bet with a 5-day juice cleanse or a week on HQ with a full Tom Selleck mustache? RIP Cannell and Bell. Thanks for everything, Cole.
We could work. Well, I could do both of those. I already did a 3-day water only cleanse this week. The stash on HQ actually would be really good. I can make that happen. Would you guys be willing to buy out for that? I mean, it's kind of like you guys better accept the offer.
Owe us. Yeah, I think that you'd be paying off debt at that point.
I don't think it's a pay. Yeah.
All right, I have a game on unofficial. So there were not many analysts back in 2017 who would acknowledge UCF's co-national championship. And so at the time, Danny White was the athletic director. He sent me some UCF gear. I was sort of the unofficial mayor of Orlando. I don't think this would be, actually, this would be a perennial game. Now, I think, no, not with too many teams. But this year, Colorado in Orlando, UCF, I mean, taking a little bit of the ire of Colorado. I think I can just hop right on that UCF bandwagon again. I'll lead the parade into the stadium. I think that's got to be at least in the conversation.
I keep waiting for Chip to pull out Mr. Wolf's head. I mean, I figure he's got that in that office. He's wearing it, Mr. NC State over there.
I feel like if I'm going to be the grand marshal of a game, it's got to be
does it have a hilarious game? Is there?
Yeah, it's got to be a wouldn't it be hilarious kind of game. It's got to be I don't know, Georgia Tech, Florida State in Dublin, you know.
Hey, watch out.
It's got to be a game that appears lopsided. It's got to be a game that maybe is on the CW. Oh, maybe it's Ole Miss Wake Forest on the CW.
On the CW.
Yeah. I'll be the grand marshal of Jackson Dart's trip to Winston-Salem to go take on the Demon Deacons in hostile territory on the network where Giants go to die, the CW. So that's what I would say of this upcoming year, because look, there's too many other people around who want to have a claim one way or the other to North Carolina, NC State. It's too deep. I can't step in and declare myself the grand marshal. There've been figures before me. There'll be figures after me. Who am I to take it from Jake Jams, who went topless during the Florida State game in Carter Finley Stadium, swinging the T-shirt? Like, how am I going to bring more energy than that? But I think that Ole Miss at Wake on the CW that seems to be my spot where I could go be a grand marshal and do a coin flip for the game.
What would Bud be?
He'd have to be one where he only stays for the first quarter because he has like a first half under total that he's played in it.
Guys, I am hedging hard. I am live hammering like this over because they've gotten into scoring range.
Yes.
But Bud hits the ceremonial enter button on the simulation. Don't need to watch this game. I could just push this button and tell you who's going to win. 54% of the time.
Truthfully, it might be Miami, Florida.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
I need Bud as the grand marshal of Miami and Florida, and I need him out there with the coach.
It's got to be at Hard Rock, though.
Well, I want him out there with the coach decision chart. I want him to. I need him to do win probability analysis on every single Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal decision. So not only does he need to be the grand marshal flipping the coin, I need a BudBot feed where he is telling me the win probability added for every coaching decision from both the Miami and the Florida side.
Bud out there at Hard Rock Stadium for the coin flip, welcoming all the tens and tens of you who have showed up to see this game.
It's and booze rain down. Yeah, it's we appreciate it, and we are working on. We'll get Tom out to do the coin flip. If
invited to do the coin flip at Army Navy, I will accept. I don't think I'm up very high on the list of people they're going to have doing that.
What if we tell an elected officer to sit down because Tom Fornelli's here?
If the president can't make it, let's get Tom.
Listen, I know that everybody, the actual elected leaders, they're busy, but I know their staffers all big Cover 3 fans. So reach out to us. You know how to get in touch. We can we can be able to help you out with all of that. So one of the questions that I did not get a chance to answer that came at the end of Wednesday's show is, so what conference is coming up next? The answer, the SEC. We begin SEC win totals on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So come and hang out, watch live. We'll start out with Alabama, and we'll work our way through about halfway through the conference. Back half of the conference follows on Wednesday. We appreciate all of you, and you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See ya.